Imagine walking into a medieval marketplace, the heavy air thick with the stench of blood, fat, and smoke. There were no refrigerators, no blocks of ice, yet meat still had to last long enough to be sold, cooked, and eaten. What secrets allowed butchers of the Middle Ages to defy rot, that invisible enemy hiding in every cut of flesh? In those times, meat was never just food. It was both a luxury and a risk. Nobles and townsfolk craved it for their feasts and daily meals, but all understood one harsh truth: fresh meat spoiled fast. Without cooling, a piece of beef left under the sun could turn rancid within hours. The stench of decay wasn't only repulsive, it was deadly. Rotten meat carried parasites, bacteria, and disease, endangering not just individuals but entire communities. Chronicles spoke of the dread of foodborne illness, especially in crowded towns where markets overflowed with animal carcasses. Buyers hesitated before each purchase, sniffing, pressing, and trusting only familiar butchers. For the poor, the danger was worse. They often couldn't afford fresh cuts and had to settle for questionable ones. Illnesses from spoiled, flesh-haunted homes, a grim reminder of how fragile survival truly was. To eat meat in the Middle Ages was to gamble, not with taste, but with life itself. The simplest defense against spoilage was speed. Butchers depended on the rhythm of daily slaughter. Animals arrived at dawn, and by mid-morning, their meat hung for sale. Freshness was the only assurance. Markets were designed so livestock pens stood near the butcher stalls, making the path from living creature to cut of meat nearly instant. This served two vital purposes. It kept food safer and limited the time rot could take hold. Shoppers, too, adjusted their habits. They never expected to store food for days. Instead, people bought only what could be eaten before nightfall. For many, the morning cries of bleating goats or squealing pigs marked the promise of the day's meals. This immediacy carried deeper meaning. Fresh slaughter symbolized purity, vitality, and trust between butcher and buyer. In a world without cold storage, speed meant survival. Medieval life followed this rhythm of urgency. Once meat left the butcher's stall, it was expected to be cooked within hours. Families bought just enough for a single meal or two, never more. Leftovers were rare, for anything uneaten by sunrise became a danger. Recipes from the time reflect this haste. Boiling, roasting, and stewing were all fast methods to make raw flesh safe to eat. Markets were built for constant turnover, with sellers shouting to draw customers before the day's heat spoiled their goods. For peasants and townsfolk alike, the rule was simple: eat before rot begins. Wealthier families with servants tried to stretch time by hanging meat in cool cellars, but even those efforts were short-lived. Eating quickly was not a choice, it was survival itself. Every meal was a battle against decay. Salt, however, stood as the great protector against corruption. In the Middle Ages, it was so precious that it rivaled gold in value, traded across deserts, and taxed by kings. When rubbed into raw flesh or soaked in brine, salt pulled out moisture, the very lifeblood of bacteria. The result was tough, leathery meat that could endure for weeks or even months. Soldiers, sailors, and pilgrims survived on salted pork and beef sealed in barrels that crossed entire kingdoms. For ordinary families, a modest supply of salted meat meant safety through long winters or fasting seasons when fresh slaughter was scarce. Its flavor was sharp and required soaking before cooking, but its power to preserve was unmatched. Beyond necessity, salted meat carried meaning. It became the taste of endurance, of readiness for hardship, of humanity's defiance against time itself. Without salt, medieval life would have been far more fragile. Smoke became another fierce ally against decay. To people of that age, smoke was not merely the scent of fire, it was the very essence of preservation. By hanging cuts of meat above slow-burning wood, butchers transformed fresh flesh into something that could last for months. The smoke coated the surface with protective compounds while drying it slowly, shrinking it into tougher, denser forms. From this came smoked hams, sausages, and fish that fed Europe for centuries. Many villages had simple smokehouses, small huts where families hung their meat from rafters, letting the rising haze perform its quiet magic. The wood itself mattered. Oak and beech were favored, each lending its own distinct taste. In larger towns, smokehouses stood near bakeries, churches, and castles, producing great stores of food for soldiers, monasteries, and long winters. The method was imperfect. Smoked meat was hard, salty, and required careful boiling or stewing to soften again, but it carried the flavor of resilience. To eat smoked meat was to taste endurance itself, fire's alchemy turning fragility into strength. For the medieval world, smoke was a refrigerator built from air and ash. And when salt and smoke could not suffice, human ingenuity found other paths. Vinegar, wine, and spices became the guardians of both flavor and illusion. Some cuts were submerged in sour liquids to slow decay and tenderize the flesh. Wine, with its acidity and status, elevated preservation into luxury. Yet the most fascinating defense came from spices carried along the Silk Roads: pepper, ginger, cinnamon, and cloves, each more precious than silver. They did more than season food. They concealed the scent of meat just beginning to spoil. For the wealthy, this was both practical and symbolic. Spice signified dominance over nature's rot. Medieval recipes read like acts of disguise, layering aroma upon aroma to hide the truth beneath. For ordinary folk, humble herbs, garlic, thyme, and sage, served as modest shields, offering a faint touch of protection and the comforting illusion of freshness. Together, vinegar, wine, and spices revealed the ingenuity of medieval kitchens, not just preserving food, but transforming decay into something edible, even appealing. In the cold northern and eastern regions of Europe, nature itself offered the best preservation: ice and snow. During long winters, meat could be stored in underground cellars or outdoor pits where freezing temperatures nearly halted decay. Wealthy estates and monasteries harvested blocks of ice from frozen lakes and rivers, storing them in insulated ice houses lined with straw and earth. These early freezers often lasted into spring, providing fresh meat long after the slaughtering season ended. Ordinary villagers relied on the harshness of winter itself. Carcasses hung outside froze solid, preserved by nature's chill until thawed for use. For those living near the Baltic or the Alps, the cold became an ally, a natural defense against rot. But this reliance on ice had limits. When the thaw returned, so did the need for salt, smoke, and spice. Still, the memory of frozen plenty shaped their way of life. Winter, though scarce, was paradoxically the safest time to eat. Meat was too precious and too perilous to trust to luck. Medieval towns established strict laws to control butchers and markets. City councils issued bans against selling spoiled meat or disguising old cuts as fresh. Inspectors, often called meat viewers, roamed the stalls enforcing standards. Punishments for deceit ranged from fines to public disgrace, sometimes forcing offenders to display their rotting goods as a warning. Repeat offenders could lose their licenses entirely. Guilds, too, maintained discipline, policing members to protect their trade's reputation. Such laws revealed a deep, shared fear. One tainted piece could infect dozens and unleash sickness in crowded towns. For rulers, keeping meat safe was both a public duty and a political necessity. Chroniclers described riots sparked by rumors of corruption, showing how fragile that trust truly was. In this sense, law became another form of preservation, less visible than salt or smoke, yet just as vital in shielding society from decay. Still, no system was flawless. Preservation often failed, and for the poor, spoiled meat remained a grim reality. Unable to afford fresh cuts or costly spices, they bought what others rejected: flesh already graying, carrying the faint, sour scent of danger. Chroniclers spoke of stomach illnesses spreading through villages after communal feasts where spoiled meat was eaten simply because no one could bear to waste it. Some medieval recipes even evolved as acts of concealment. Heavy stews and strong sauces that hid the stench of decay just long enough to make food seem edible. But every such meal was a risk. Food poisoning, fever, and death stalked those who gambled with hunger. For rulers and clergy, these dangers justified strict control over butchers. Yet the truth was crueler. Hunger often triumphed over caution. For the poor, the line between nourishment and poison vanished. Eating rotten meat became more than misfortune. It was the mark of poverty's brutality, where survival itself required consuming decay. The medieval war against rot laid the foundations of modern food culture. Every method, salting, smoking, cellaring, spicing, and even enforcing laws, was a step toward what refrigeration now does effortlessly. Step into a modern supermarket and you see the victory of centuries. Glass cases humming with cold, neat rows of vacuum-sealed meat, dates printed with precision. Yet beneath this abundance lies a quiet echo of fear. The ancient dread of spoilage still shapes our habits. Food safety codes mirror the old market ordinances, and preserved meats, smoked hams, salted cod, spiced sausages, remain not relics of need, but symbols of tradition. What the medieval world fought daily, we now barely notice. Still, their legacy endures in every kitchen. To savor bacon, to season with salt or beer, to cook with vinegar or wine is to taste the memory of their struggle. Their battle with decay was not just about survival. It was a work of invention, a defiance that forged culture, cuisine, and community. The story of a medieval butcher reminds us that every meal we enjoy today is a quiet triumph over time, rot, and death itself.